Okay, welcome. I'll be the first one to talk today. I'm going to be talking about the future of CSS with sparkles of JavaScript. The title gave it away, but I'm going to be talking about JavaScript and CSS mainly today. There's a big difference between the two languages. In JavaScript, the general sentiment is like, whoa, it goes way too fast. You have like very fast new features. You have the feeling that you can't keep up. In CSS, it's kind of different. There's also a lot of features, there's also a lot of development, but you still have the sentiment that goes really slow. And the general is, why is that? Why is this happening? If you take a look at JavaScript, at day 0, there's a new feature released. At day 1, maybe earlier, maybe a little bit later, there's a polyfill already released. And you can already use it. You just use the polyfill and you can use it in your sites today. And then after some time, all your targeted browsers support it, and you can just throw away the polyfill. With CSS, it's kind of a different story. Day 0, the new feature is released, and immediately you got a lot of people complaining about, yeah, that's cool and all, but I cannot use it today because I need to support IL11 or whatever. And then after waiting a really long time, the browsers support it, and you can just use it. The same goes if you have your own ID for a very cool feature. With JavaScript, you think about your feature, give it a day or 10, depending on how much time you have after your hours. You made it, you published it on NPM, people use it, everybody's happy. And after a while, the browsers look at your feature and say, wow, that's cool, we want to implement it. They implement it, and you can use it natively. With CSS, again, a different story. If you have like a great feature for CSS, most people have that great idea, let's build it, and it kind of stops there for most people. And again, why? Why is this happening? Well, if you take a look at the rendering pipeline, and that's where all the CSS magic is happening, you can see we don't have a lot of access. The green one, we have full access, so we have access to the DOM with JavaScript. We have a little bit access to the CSS OM, but all the rest, the parser, the cascade step, the layout, the paint, the composite, it's all just magic. So if you want to write a new feature or you want to polyfill your new feature, you need to take a look at the DOM, a little bit at the CSS OM, then let do the rendering pipeline his work and re-evaluate with JavaScript. And you can already see a problem there. Like the flow for writing your own CSS feature or polyfill. Step 1, write your basic logic. You have a great idea, you write it. You as a developer, you feel like the king of CSS. You have this, but wait. Then you think about, yeah, what's happening with the matching rules, and then only replace the rules as the inline style. And then you need to calculate the specificity, then you need to check the media rules, then you cannot forget about it. And so on, and so on, and so on. It goes. This is a slide from Phil Walton's talk. You need to really check it out. It's really great. About polyfilling CSS. So you as a developer feel like, okay, I found one bug. I'm going to chase it. And then after a while, where is it? And you have 1,000 bugs all over the place. Your performance in the meanwhile, while you fix all your bugs, just disappears. You don't have any 60 frames per second anymore. You see a lot of reflows going on in your application. And then after a week or so, you just, as a developer, you just had it. And then a couple of years later, if you still think about it, that time that I wanted to write a new CSS feature, no, not going to happen. Now, again, why? This is actually the answer why. You do not have any access. CSS is not extendable, at least not in a good way. You need to wait a lot. You have no good entry point. Now, without low-leveling styling primitives, the innovation will move at the pace of the slowest adapting browsers. And that's why the developers have the feeling that it goes really slow with CSS. while they still work hard on it. And there is where Houdini comes into play. Houdini wants to make CSS as a language user extensible, because they believe that allowing developers to extend CSS will be good for the ecosystem. You, as a developer, should not wait for the browser vendors to have the new feature that you want. You should be able to make it yourself and make it so that it's usable. As you can see, the Houdini working group, you have again your rendering pipeline is going to provide you with a lot of APIs to plug in to that rendering pipeline. You have the parser API, the typed object model, the font metrics, the box tree API, the layout API, the paint API, the animation API, the scroll API. You have worklets to do that. You have the properties and values API to do that. Now today in this talk, I'll be covering these ones, the property and values API, the layout API, the paint API, and a little bit about worklets. I'm not going to do them all because I don't have enough time. Now, let's get started with the first one, the properties and values API. This was originally sold as CSS variables, probably known by some of you guys, but it's actually meant as an extension point for JavaScript. As you can see here, you have the roots. You can set here your CSS variables, like I made the theme background and the theme color. And then you can use them across your CSS with the var, and then say which var you want to use. You can reuse them everywhere. I have this nice demo where you can see the theme color. I can switch from dark to a light theme to a tomato theme and to a broken theme. Yeah, that's a problem. Okay. The amount of JavaScript I needed to write for this is actually not that much. Now, on changing my select, I just say check with which theme it should be. I pass in my colors to the setTheme function, which is here. It receives a background and a color, and it just sets the property on the root, the desired color and background. So I don't need to check everything in the DOM. I don't need to check every class that has this variable. I just need to set this one. So the great benefit about this is you have easy access for JavaScript. You just need to set the value of the property. It uses the cascade. As you can see here, you can easily use the media queries to override your set styles, which is kind of hard to do if you don't only do it with JavaScript. And it's limited DOM manipulation. You don't need to put style attributes at 100 elements. You just need to put the variables at HTML. If you want to learn more about this, you can check out these two articles. Really nice. For your information, the double dashes are used as a prefix to prevent preprocessors from compiling your custom properties. So it's been made to make sure that you can use the variables of your preprocessor and the variables of CSS together. The good news is it's already supported across the most browsers, so you can already use it. Yeah, has this weird bug. Okay, there's just one big problem, and that is that your browser of your user agent is not really sure what you are talking about. All the values that you pass through, is it the number, is it the color? Your browser just sees a string. It has some downsides. It's not animatable, so if you have variables and you change the value, you cannot animate it because the browser doesn't know what you're talking about. He doesn't know that you invented a color or that you invented a new type of number or whatever. There's no way for the user agent to optimize or fallback because all he has is strings. And there's no editor of DevTool support. You can just put, as you have seen in my demo, there's a broken theme. Nobody knows. It just accepts it. The solution is to define it. And here is where Houdini enters with the property and values API. You can now register your custom property by doing css.register property. You give it the name, you give it the syntax, you give it, you say if it inherits or not, and you give it an initial value. This is done in JavaScript. If you take a look at the values of syntax, so name is just naming your variable as you did in CSS in the root. Syntax is just choosing which kind of property it is. Is it the color? Is it the length? Is it the percentage? Is it the length percentage? You can define it here. You have possible notations. If you write it like this, you have a length and then you have a pipe and percentage. Then your property accepts both, but not in the calculation in the calc function. If you use the length percentage, then you accept both and also in the calc. You can also say that your syntax is property of length, but it's a list often. So you just add a plus at the end. The second one is the inheritance. You can say if it inherits or not. If you put inherits on true, you can see here if you change, you have an article figure, which is in your article, and you have an article figure image. So this image is in your figure, is in your article. If you put the vertical spacing here to 5 rem, then all the children elements will get the 5 rem as vertical spacing. But actually, we don't want that. If you put the vertical spacing of our article to 5 rem, we don't want all the children elements to inherit that. That's the same how CSS is now today. If I put padding on my article, this padding is not also applied to the figure in that article. So that's why we have the inherits set to false, which is wrong here. And you can see here, if you put vertical spacing to 5, we'll get it in the article, but the figure and the image will not listen to it. So that's the first step. We need to define it, and then we can just use it. As you can see here, the next demo, we have dark, we have the light theme, and the cool thing about this, we cannot now animate it because the browser knows that it's a color, so it can animate it. You have the tomato theme. If we go to the broken theme, it's also a nice feature of CSS. If you give in the wrong value, it just ignores it. It's just using the last value that you have given to the property, which was not possible if you don't define your variable, because the browser just only sees strings. Okay, general warning, it's still behind the flag, but you can check if it's available by doing just if css.register property exists, and then register your properties. Now, with the properties and value API, we have a lot of benefits and some extras. We have easy access by JavaScript. We use the C and CSS, which is the cascade. We limit DOM manipulations. We have now properties that are animatable. The UA can optimize because, for example, he knows that it's a color. So in his rendering pipeline, he knows, okay, this is a color. I can do it this and this and this way. And the editor and DevTools can now say, if you give an URL in your color attribute, he can say, nope, that's wrong. Don't do that. Okay, let's go to an extension point, the paint worklet. Now, the paint worklet allows you to write a paint function, which allows you to draw directly on your background of your element. Why would you want to do that? Now, if you have some cool animation in your button or in your div, mostly you have to add a new div, or you have to add a new pseudo content property like before or after. So that will be no necessary anymore. The second one is efficiency gains. So the browser, your animation is now happening in the rendering pipeline, so the browser can really optimize everything. And in result of these two, you have a performance gains, which is really nice if you have phone batteries in your mind. And the third is the general point, and that's CSS would be extensible. Now, before we go any further with the paint worklet, I need to explain a new term, and that's worklets. Now, what are worklets? Worklets are lightweight versions of the web worker. Web workers are really heavy and really expensive to load in, and are not being used to have a lot of web workers registered. But the worklet is a new version of that is lightweight and gives you access to the rendering pipeline. If you want to compare it with the web worker, the normal web worker does run off the main thread. That's the same with worklets. But the worklet has a fast initialization, so it's not expensive to spin up, which in web workers it is. But the trade-off is the worklet has no DOM access. You cannot access the DOM. Web workers can. Now, the current worklets available are the paint worklets. We'll be talking about this soon. The layout worklet will also be in the stock. And then the animation worklet and the audio worklet also exist now, but we'll not cover these. Now, how do you access this worklet? So the worklet gives you access to the rendering pipeline. How do you, as a developer, access it? By writing your own modules. So you can do a register, for example, for the paint worklet, you can register a paint, give your module a name, and start writing your code. Then you need to add your module to the paint worklet by just referencing with the css.paintworklet.add module and then the location of your JavaScript file where your worklet is written. As it is an async function, you can wait for multiple modules to be loaded and then do your desired stuff. Now back to paint. Let's draw a circle. Let's start with something easy. So we learned the first step is to register a module, to create our module. That's register paint circle. You can see we have two functions here. We have our get input properties, and we have our paint function. The paint function receives three variables, and that's context, the size, and the properties. We'll get back to that in a moment. Step 2 is adding it. So we check if the paint worklet is available, and then we add our circle paint module to the paint worklet. And step 3 is using it. So you just say, okay, for my circle button, I want a background image, I want to paint it, and I want to paint a circle. And that's about it. Circle reference to the module that you just have created. Now writing or painting the circle itself, we'll get back to that later, but we see that we have the context, the size, and the properties. Now I want to know where I want to draw my circle. I want to draw it in the middle of my button, so I get the size of my element, the width, and the height, and I divide it by 2 to get my x and y values. The radius, I just take the smallest of the two. Then we start the drawing. You can see it has a lot of similarities to how you draw on a canvas. You just define your fill style, which is this nice purple. You begin your path, you draw a nice circle, and you fill it with your fill style color, and that's done. And you have this. So if my module is loaded, I can just say in my CSS background image, paint me a circle. Now the cool thing about this, as we defined in our worklet that we want to that we use the size of the element. If we resize our button, the circle resizes as well. There's no extra JavaScript to do this. It just knows you have a re-rendering, and your model listens to the size input, so he renders. Now, the cool thing about it, there's no extra DOM elements. You don't need any canvas div before or afters in your button element. It's reactive on changes without doing anything of the work. It uses the cascade, so I can easily say only do it for the header when the minimum width is 40 rems, which is also kind of hard to do if you want to only do it in JavaScript. And the browser can optimize. It's again in his rendering pipeline, he can optimize. He knows which values that can change, and he can just take it with him. Now, let's make the demo a little bit more complex, because the demo I just showed you, you can just do background image circle SVG and put it on background size cover, and you have the same result. But let's make it a little bit more interesting. You can add a dynamic color to the circle. Now, how are we going to do that? By registering a property, and I'm going to call it circle color. It's going to be a color, it will not inherit, and the initial value is white. Now in my circle button, I want to define the property circle color as this nice purple. Again, I want to paint the circle, and as a nice cool extra feature, I can animate this property. And on hover, I want to change the circle color to tomato. Now, we're not done yet. We need to adjust our worklet, our module a little bit. You can see here now in your get input properties, we can return an array of the inputs, the properties we want to listen to. So this one is the circle color. Want to learn to it? Okay. And now in our paint functions, we can get this property by just going properties.get and then the name of your property. And then the only adjustment is made is that we set the fill style to the fill we got here. So the same thing. If we now hover on our button, it comes nice orange. Again, you can define another color easily here, or use media colors or whatever to make it more dynamic. That's still kind of boring. So I thought, why should we not place the circle? Now it's nicely in the middle. Why should we not place it where we click on the button? Again, two extra CSS properties, the circle X and the circle Y. Both are numbers, both don't inherit, and both their initial value is 0. I have a little bit of extra JavaScript. It's outside of anything of the worklet. It's just a JavaScript file, because you cannot get the X and the Y of where you clicked with just CSS or with your worklet, because you don't have any DOM access. So these properties need to be set with just JavaScript. You can put add event listener click, and you listen to the event and the element, and you set just the X and the Y. It's a little bit function. And then in our module, we can also listen now to circle X, circle Y, and we get our X and our Y now not from the size in half, but from the properties X and Y. And that's the only change I made. Again, the CSS is the same. Now where I click on my button, the circle appears. Again, if I hover on it, it just stays all the same. Okay, cool. I liked it. The nice thing is you can also animate it. So now you can do this, which is also nice, without doing anything more than just saying I want to transition it. Okay, let's go full on crazy. I also wanted to expand and fade it out. So the only extra property I made was an animation tick. It's a number. It doesn't inherit an initial value is 0. And I only animate paint the circle when the button has the class animating. And I have an animation tick that I set when the class animating is on it to 1000. And the only thing I do is animate, transition your animation tick. This is also a little bit of extra JavaScript I wrote next to find the X and the Y value. This is the only thing that this does is putting the animation class on the element and off the element with a duration of 1000. So the only thing I do next is listen also to the animation tick. I store it here in my variable tick. And then I just say, okay, the radius, which was the minimum value of the X or the Y in the previous example. Now I get the width of my element, and I take a percentage of it depending on the tick. And my fill style, I get by my circle color in mind. And I also set a global alpha to fade it out. I start with 1, and again, because I'm animating from 0 to 1000, it gets less and less and less and less until it gets to 0. Again, I draw my arc and I fill it. I don't know if you can guess which feature I have made, but it's this one. You now have a material button without any extra elements or whatever. You just have with 60 frames per second animation, because it's very performant. It's just a new rendering pipeline. And yeah, I think that's awesome. If you want to see more awesome Houdini demos, you should really check out CSS-Houdinis.rocks by Vincent. You can also check them out by the Google Chrome Labs. They also have nice demos. Okay, that was the paint worklet. Now we're going to talk about the layout worklet. The layout worklet gives you the ability to write your own layout algorithms in addition to the ones that already are here. So you already have the box flow layout. I see it's the blow flow layout here. You have the flex layout. You have the grid layout already to your disposal. But what if you can add constraint layouts? What if you can just make masonry layouts without fiddling with 1,000 lines of JavaScript and resize and listening to resize of the window or whatever? Just make it in the browser and it's there. Okay, so let's create it. Again, step one is to create your module, because if you want access to the worklet, you need to create a module. Now it's register layout instead of register paint, and we give it a name. We give it the name masonry. And we have again this get input properties, but now we have a layout function which receives children, edges, constraints, and properties. Step two is adding it to your layout worklet. We already know this. We check if the layout worklet is in the CSS, and then we just add our module. And step three is using it. We can say, in my awesome container, my display is masonry. And all its children will be displayed in the masonry layout. Okay, cool. Let's write the layout module. It's small because I was looking at it. It's a Chrome Labs demo. And I was like, I don't understand it. And then I read the explainer a little bit more, and then way at the bottom it says, this is a very complex API with some foreign terminology, but it's so complex because they really want to give you the power that the rendering pipeline has to layouts, to making a layout, so they give you all. To be honest, I'm still learning it. I don't understand it all. I understand it a little bit, but I don't understand it enough to explain it to you guys. But I have a demo, thanks to the Chrome guys. And I need to open it. Okay. And there we have it. I'll inspect it. Okay, cool. So if you can see here, I have my centered content and I have my masonry item. You see here you define the columns that you want to use and you set it to display masonry. And if you see, I have added some media queries. So we start at 0, no, so just a display block. But if we get big enough, the masonry gets a display masonry with some padding and some columns defined. And if you go any larger, you can see again with min width, we add columns 3. And that's nice. We don't need to watch resize. You don't have any elements that just go up on each other. You just have your masonry layout because you have access to the layout step of your rendering engine. Yeah, back to the slides. Okay, but that was the layout worklet, very short, but I don't understand it yet fully. There's more possibilities. We only saw the paint and the layout API, a little bit about worklets, and we saw the properties and values API. But as you can see, there's a lot of more APIs you can use. If you already want to use it today, then I got some good and some bad news for you. They're working on it, working hard on it. Now, Chrome is the one that has the most in the green and the yellow. And you're probably thinking, yeah, Safari and Edge, it's all just red. Now, the thing is, the good news is everybody is invested. They're all working together, like also people from Edge are working hard with Chrome developer team to make this happen. The only thing is Chrome and Google has way more people to throw at it. The Edge and Safari has way less people to work on it. But what about using it now? Well, you can start using custom properties already, because I showed you it's green across the board. And you can register your properties as when available. This gives you a performance improvement for the browsers that does support it. And you can use it as a type of progressive enhancement. Like say, the animation only happens for the browsers that can register the property. Other browsers just use the standard variables. And 3 is you can experiment and have fun already with worklets. Now, are you triggered? Nice. You can follow the news. I have some 4 people that are really tweeting a lot about Houdini. So follow them. What can you do next is let the vendors know that you want to use it, make a feature requests. But also, and that's the most important one, spread the word, do demos. Write about it and give talks about it. The vendors are listening. If they see there's a lot of demo and a lot of enthusiasm about Houdini, they will work on it harder and will put more people on it. So the general conclusion, Houdini, or the working group Houdini, wants to just make CSS as a language user extensible, because as a developer you just don't want to wait for a new feature, you just want to make it good and want to use it. And that's it. I'm Ibe Vanmeenen. You can find the slides here. And thank you for listening.